How do you actually get veggie seedlings started? And why do sometimes your seedlings just not sprout or germinate at all? Are there any additional tips or weird things I should know about starting seeds in Australia? Yes! I'll answer all of this and show you a couple hacks for getting your seeds started 2, 3, 4 times faster. And I'll also show you how commercial nurseries start their seeds. Hey, I'm Ryan, probably better known as Culinary Garden. This video will make you a better gardener, so sit back, hit that full screen button, and let's dig in. Seeds are really small, so it's really easy to underestimate how cool they actually kind of are on the inside. Because when we see one, we just kind of see a little tiny marble that we assume that that's all it is. But what's packed in is actually really cool. It's almost like a pre-assembled IKEA kit of a plant. The first thing that's in there is actually just some food or nutrition. There's enough nutrition packed in the seed for the plant to be able to get to at least big enough to sprout its true leaves. We'll get onto that. Next, when we think of a seedling, the first thing that we probably think about are the first 2 leaves that come out and pop up. Well, what I think is really cool and that a lot of people don't appreciate is that these leaves that are the first 2 to come out are actually part of and inside the seed, and they're just folded up into a dormant form. So we take our food, we're gonna wrap it in our leaves to create our little seed. And so this is here ready to go, ready to spring up. And then the part of the seed that we normally see is this outer husk that holds these 2 neatly folded leaves and nutrition, which is where the newspaper comes in. And now what we have is we have built a seed. Now for this seed to become a seedling, only a couple things have to happen. The outer shell is just made to protect everything inside over the season in between when the seed drops and when this plant naturally wants to come up later on in the season. How it does that, we'll get back to. But the first thing you need to know is in order for these leaves to get what they need, which is essentially water, kind of like a balloon they want to fill up, we first need to completely saturate the outer shell of, I'm getting really wet. Completely saturate this outer shell. Might look like you'd probably water that and then say, yeah, that's probably good to go. But I guarantee if you open it up, the leaves inside are actually bone dry. We haven't done a good enough job of actually getting it wet. And what you'll find is that this is the first mistake that people make when trying to get their seedlings to start, is that you actually don't give them enough water. Just putting them in nice wet soil isn't actually enough to penetrate the outer shell to get through and hydrate these inner leaves of the seed. But the next thing that you need to know is probably the more common one that people get wrong, especially beginners. Now, a lot of seed varieties, you can completely saturate to the point that is perfectly what they want in order to germinate. And if you don't get this other thing right, they still won't germinate. So if we think about what a seed naturally does in its plant life cycle, is it's probably going to become a seed. Through late summer, the plant will dry off, the seeds will drop to the ground. And then what happens is there's autumn and winter where the plant's gonna get a whole lot of rain and it's going to get pretty wet, but the seedlings don't actually sprout. This is because of what plants really need to grow really well. If you have watched all of my videos, you would know that probably the most underrated resource that plants need is actually sunlight, because the plant turns sunlight into sugars that it then uses to grow. In terms of evolution, if the plant comes up at a time of the year where there's not enough sunlight in each part of the day for that plant to get the growth that it needs to achieve the part of its life cycle that it needs to then go to seed and reproduce again, dies and it's wasted its life. So this is what it does to prevent it. The seed is looking for the right soil temperatures and heat signals to trigger a hormone response to know, oh hey, it's probably about that time of year again, time to actually pop up. And this is why, if you're like me the first couple of years that I tried to grow plants, when you try and start seeds in winter, just like in a tray outside, they usually rarely germinate. And this is why things like greenhouses and seed raising mats, which are little heated mats, are so popular. And it's also why in some of my guides I recommend growing stuff on a sunny windowsill inside when you're in sort of the fringe seasons before it's properly summer. Even now, we're about a month away from summer, and any seeds that I'm starting, I'm still putting inside on my heat mat or my sunny windowsill, because overnight it's still about 10 degrees, and that is not the temperature that seeds love to actually get started. So now that we know the two pieces of the puzzle, what does this actually mean for us as home gardeners and you as a beginner gardener? What's a practical guide to get a good germination rate and quite quickly? All right, let's start by talking about tray size, because there's a couple gotchas here. The first thing that you need to know is that when we're starting seeds, think about if we were to put any other kind of woody material into the ground and then keep it quite wet, what would happen is that the microbial life over time would start to break that down. So a constant fight that we're usually fighting when starting seeds is we're trying to get them to germinate and get established before the seeds actually start to rot away. And for this reason, and I don't actually understand the science behind it, but starting in smaller cells really helps negate the seed rotting effect, which is why so many people start in these tiny cells, apart from also the cost of soil helps you cut down a little bit. So for the vast majority of my seedlings, what I do is I buy these 24 cell trays that you get from Bunnings for like $10 in a packet of 5 or so. And then I just cut them into 6s because they're much easier to handle. And by the time you're trying to actually get a seedling out, if there's one that's a bit stuck in there, you don't want to turn over the whole tray and have the whole thing pop out. This is much more manageable. I just take a knife and cut it. However, what I will say is there are a couple crops where jumping straight to this 100 ml-ish size pot, I think works really well. And that's basically anything in the cucurbit family, which is cucumbers and pumpkins and zucchinis and that sort of thing. Because those seedlings can take a little bit to take off, but once they do, they grow so quickly that realistically, you're going to really struggle trying to transplant them or pot them up from something this size into a bigger pot to let them get big enough to then actually put them in the ground. Dirt or soil or the mix of brown and other stuff that you actually fill your seed cell with is something that nerdy gardeners and like experienced gardeners nerd out on a lot. But for beginners, well, what I did for years and years, and I think this tray might actually be filled with, is just get a good quality potting mix. You can fill it with that and then just make sure to pick out any really big chunky bits of material out of your seed tray before putting your seed directly above or below it. However, some other options are making your own, which is what most gardeners do once you kind of get a bit into it. Mine is a mix of coconut coir, some sand, some perlite and vermiculite, some homemade compost that has been sieved to only get some of the smaller bits, and then not too much else. I don't really overcomplicate it. And by the way, for completely new gardeners, if you are wondering what the white stuff is that you get in potting mixes sometimes, that's not styrofoam like I think most of us think it is. It's either perlite or vermiculite, which is really cool material. It's basically in there to help keep air in the soil because it's such a porous and airy and jagged surface. It helps keep air in the soils, which is what your plant roots and microbes really love. Your next option is buying a purpose seed raising mix. I get this stuff sometimes, it's okay. You still end up with some huge chunky bits in it that I don't really like. But if you're just starting out and want to just completely take the guesswork out of it and you're willing to spend 20 bucks, it's completely fine, a completely valid purchase. You're not really wasting your money if you're buying it, because by the time you buy the packets of all the stuff that you need to make your own, you're probably spending $60, $80. You're just making a whole lot more of it. You're making wheelbarrows and wheelbarrows of it because you get so much. Next, let's talk about the actual seeds themselves. Seed brands, do they matter? A little bit. For all intents and purposes of new gardeners, just a seed is a seed. However, there's a couple things that I think are slightly misinformation-y or assumptions that you might make that I would like to take this opportunity to clean up about seeds. The first one is, a couple comments that I've gotten is, how do I avoid GMO seeds when shopping at Bunnings and that sort of thing? GMO for vegetables in Australia is not legal. Like We don't have a single GMO vegetable crop in Australia. We have some cotton that's GMO, and we've just had bananas approved that are going to be GMO because bananas are facing this big problem with fungus that they need to take that action. And you don't grow bananas from seeds, so that's not something that you need to worry about if that's something that's a concern to you. The next one is something that you might see on some packaging, which is the term heirloom. What's a heirloom seed is essentially a variety that has been around for a long enough period of time. The amount of time is what's up for debate around heirlooms, but it's essentially a variety of that veggie that's been around since around World War II that has some special techniques around how the seeds are cultivated. They all need to actually be pollinated by actual insects. You can basically think of it of this is the old school way of getting and saving seeds, just put in a commercial little packet. And the other cool thing about heirloom seeds is if you get them, you can harvest those same seeds from this plant and it will produce the same variety as long as you haven't gotten a cross-pollination, which is something that I cannot cover in the scope of this video. You can look up seed saving if you want to learn a bit more about that. Okay, so the next term that I can't find on a seed that I own, but you'll see sometimes, there's hybrid and F1, you'll see sometimes. What this means is you take two well-known established varieties of a given veggie, say they might both be heirlooms, and then you purposely cross-pollinate them to get some specific traits from each breed. And then what you have is this hybrid seed. And the only thing to know about this is that you then, unlike an heirloom, you can't take that plant, harvest those seeds, and then get the identical crop again. Is this going too in-depth about seeds? Maybe. But the main reason that I bring that up is a fair few people, I think, see hybrid and that sort of thing and think that that might be GMO, but that's not the case. It's completely different from modifying the... It's completely different. I won't go into it. Cool, let's actually start some seeds. The first one, and this is one of the big tricks that I use to get my seeds started way quicker. And it's a container of lukewarm water, about 35 degrees. For generally most seeds, instead of going straight into the soil, going into this overnight or up to about 24 hours and then into soil, you'll find your germination times come right down. These are a great one to start on camera because they are blue. Are they naturally blue? No, some seeds, especially ones that really love germinating, like these are more cucumbers. You don't need to be freaked out when you pull out a fluoro red or blue or yellow seed. They're just sprayed with a growth suppressant just to make sure they're not germinating in the packet. And especially nice thick seeds like these cucumber seeds, letting them soak overnight helps get the whole process started so much more quickly than putting them in even a really, really wet soil. So I said I'd show you what commercial nurseries use to start their seeds. Well, essentially, they have huge trays like this, or they might start them straight into the tray that you end up buying in the store. This just gets filled with a seed raising mix. And then what they have is just a huge plate with spikes that comes down and presses nice, neat little holes in each of the trays, which guess what? We can replicate at home. For most seeds, you're just starting them about 5 millimeters deep. Just check the seed packet. And then in today's case of basil, we're going to put about 2 or 3 seeds in each hole. The reason that you do that is that most of the time, some seeds just aren't going to germinate. And then so you just put in a couple extra in, and then once they germinate, you just pick the strongest one, snip off the rest, and you're good to go. And then you can just pinch them back over. And again, ideally, we have soaked these, but I'm making a video. So saturate it. You completely saturate it, and ideally again with warm water, and then you want to leave it in a warm spot, which most of the time is going to be indoors. The reason that we say a sunny windowsill is not because seeds need sunlight to germinate. They don't. Seeds will germinate in complete darkness. It's just that once they do emerge, they will keep searching until they find sunlight, which is why you'll sometimes get some really stringy, tall seedlings with tiny little leaves at the top, because that plant has kept pushing up, thinking that it's on a dense forest floor, just trying to get its first little look of sunlight. So once they do emerge, that's when it's important to move it somewhere sunny. Hey, by the way, I know I really need to mow my lawn, and today I had a choice between making a video and mowing my lawn, and I chose to make a new video for you. So please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, consider checking out the Patreon. Thank you very much. I'll see you next time. And if you want to know some more great Aussie gardening tips, check out this video that YouTube will give you. Bye.